Hello, I am Josh Gauthier with Local Writers Read, and I'm here with my co-organizer, Claire Guyton. We're happy to partner with LA Arts for another genre spotlight for the month of August. And to do that, we have our friend Jess Koch with us as well. Local Writers Read is a literary reading series began in 2018 that features readings from various main authors in different genres all over the state. So Claire, do you want to talk about our genre spotlight for this month?
I do. Thank you. And thank you to LA Arts for inviting us again to do this. We really love doing these genre spotlights. So today we are focusing on dark fantasy. Most of us are familiar with the fantasy genre, but fantasy is a really broad category with distinct subgenres, including dark fantasy, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a kind of fantasy with very dark, sometimes even disturbing themes, and the entire story is permeated with a sense of dread and fear. Often I've heard it described as a blend of fantasy and horror. So before we sample dark fantasy, I'm going to ask my usual question of you both, and Jess, I'll start with you. What inspires you to write dark fantasy?
I like writing dark fantasy because I like playing with genre and I like writing a lot of cross genre work. Horror and fantasy are two of my favorite genres to write and to read. And so it kind of just makes sense that that would be something I would want to play with. I particularly like pulling in the tropes from both genres and then subverting them and kind of making something new out of it.
Great. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I know for me, I always enjoyed the fantasy genre in particular. And then drifting from there into dark fantasy, it's really a chance to look at monsters and the unknown and just the things that unsettle and make people afraid. And looking at them on the page, it's a chance to look at them from a new angle, especially moving things from reality into fantasy. You can kind of turn them sideways and examine them in a different light, while still dealing with things that are very real and relevant to everyday life. And so dark fantasy is a chance to bring kind of all those pieces together. And so going from there, I will move directly into our first reading of the event. This is the opening passage from a short story called The Shadow Weaver Dwells in Darkness. Hyverian the Shadow Weaver sits in darkness. He has not moved in hours, and those that serve in his house know better than to disturb him. See the way he sits on the throne he carved for himself from the heart of the mountain. See his fingers laced beneath his chin, his unblinking eyes fixed on the wooden table that stands before him. See the creases on his brow and the streaks on his face from tears that have ceased to fall. Hyverian is surrounded by wonders he has gathered, won, created. But now these things are forgotten in the shadows. The gilded scrollwork, the cases holding aging tomes, the gold trophies and marks of honor, these are meaningless. All that matters is the table, and the object which lies upon it. On the corner of the table sits a bowl of clay. The bowl is full of water and contains a single shard of stone. The stone glows with white light, and it is by this light that Hyverian watches the object on the table. For truly, it is just an object now. It is flesh and bone, blood and sinew, but it is devoid of life. And without life, without spirit, it is nothing but an empty vessel. But once, not long ago, this thing without life was Hyverian's daughter. And though the Shadow Weaver knows that this is the natural order of things, knows that the object on the table is his child no longer, he cannot look away. The form that once belonged to his little girl is covered in a golden shroud, which reveals only the vaguest shape of the figure beneath. For all his power, all his wealth, all his influence, knowledge, and experience, Hyverian still finds himself sitting alone in the dark, looking at the empty form of one he loved. And to him this is not right. Though he would, he cannot give anything he possesses to restore life to her body. except, perhaps, his own soul? It is this question, more than any other, that the Shadow Weaver contemplates as he sits alone in darkness. Alone but for the faint ripple of shadow in the corner behind him. The ripple does not move, and Hyverion pays it no mind. It waits, watching, listening. The knock at the door disrupts the Shadow Weaver's thoughts. The sound is quiet, knuckles on cold stone, but it seems loud in the utter silence of the chamber. Hyverion does not answer, but he does not need to. There is only one person who would come to him now. The steward of Hyverion's house is a woman named Kali. She began by serving Hyverion's grandmother 50 years earlier. Now, having proven herself faithful, there are very few to whom she answers. Rion, she calls him, the name Hyverion's mother used to call him. The Lady Sadia is inquiring after you. Kali's voice is low, solemn. She is interrupting, and she knows this. But in her, the interruption is permitted, so she must carry out the task that others cannot. When Hyverion does not answer, does not so much as lift his eyes to acknowledge her, Kali comes closer, positioning herself to the right side of the Shadow Weaver's throne. The ripple of shadow still does not move. She wishes to see her daughter, Kali says, interceding. She wishes for you to join in the ceremony of mourning. She has burned offerings to Mair and Pitu, but you both must make the final offering to Tamsin. The dragon cannot have her yet. These are the first words Hyverion has spoken in... How long has he been here? Has it been hours? Days? He does not know. His throat is dry, and the words cause him pain. As is fitting. She died in pain. It is right that he should share in it, if only a fraction. And I'll end there. So Jess, if you'd like to share as well.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. That was great. I'm gonna need to read the rest of that at some point, please.
Definitely, yeah.
So I'm also going to be reading the intro of a short story. And since it's the beginning, I think that's all you really need to know. It's called A Soul for the Machine. A man named Knox keeps my soul in a glass orb around his neck. It shines brightly, pulsing like a glowing blue star. I can't survive too far away from it, so I must follow my new master like a starving ghost. As children, we often try to guess what color our souls are and assert, as if we are certain that we know our color. I used to say my soul was green, like the moss that clings to the ash trees. It's strange that though we say we want to know, no one actually wants their soul ripped out so they can find out for sure. Today, Knox is bartering organs for machine parts at the dark market, hidden in the shadows of Ohm. Most buyers favor the dark market of Ohm over those in Lyshir and Iren because Ohm has little, if any, adept enforcement of trading laws. If it exists, it can be sold in Ohm, the ash scrapper's mantra. I don't know what value the parts have to him or what he's doing with them, but I know they're machinery, the kind banned after the war. Not that legality matters here. Rain pours down on the market in pools on the tops of tents, bowing their fabric under its weight. I'm used to the nearly constant rain in the ash. It's a misnomer of a name for a place that is more a seasonal forest than a desert. But today it's cold, the coldest day of the year so far, which makes the rain less tolerable. Winter is just weeks away. I should be migrating south by now to the dunes, not a misnomer. I miss the warmth of the sun on my skin. I stand outside the trader's tent, just close enough to hear the conversation, but Knox doesn't want me too close, not yet. There's another trader's stand to my right, and her table is messily littered with trinkets from the ash. Some valuable, others not, but I doubt she knows which is which. I've been watching her closely because she isn't watching anything closely at all. As she turns away, distracted by a stream of water pouring from the back of her tent, I reach down and swipe a brass pendant with a winding mechanism from the corner of her table. I wrap the chain around my remaining fingers and slip the piece into my pocket. And as I do, I feel that familiar thrum in my chest, the adrenaline surging. My body tingles with chemical lightness. I almost forgot how good it feels. The market is busy, but no one is paying attention to me. They can see the distinct blood-red scarf, the mark of a slave and ohm, wound around my neck like a noose, covering my nose and mouth. People push against me as they make their way through the rows of colorful tents and crowds of rain-soaked peddlers, musicians, slaves, beggars. It's as though I don't exist, which is all right with me. I've spent most of my life trying to disappear, to not draw attention, though it was never quite as easy before I was soulless. My less than brilliant plan to get my soul back so far hadn't worked. Each time Knox brings me to the market, I try to steal something mechanical, something small that he won't notice curled up in my fist, something that can be taken apart and made into a lockpick. But I've already snapped, bent, and otherwise destroyed countless picks trying to unlock the room where Knox sleeps, where my soul hangs loose around his neck, just waiting for me. The catch is that I'm actually terrible at picking locks. Before now, I never had much cause to break into locked places. But today, I have another plan. I saw him as we were coming into the market, sitting under his matte black tent, only a few tables down from where I am, Ika. Arms crossed, hood up, pupilless white eyes cast deep in shadow, probably watching for thieves like me. He only comes to Ohm every few months, and I've been waiting and watching because he has something that I desperately want. And I'll end there.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was great. Neither one of you got into any of the, particularly difficult stuff, but it's so obvious that it is dark fantasy because that dread is there, and the disturbing themes. Thank you very much. So before we say our goodbyes, I would love it if you would both recommend a favorite author or a favorite book. You want to start, Jess?
Sure. Dark fantasy. Yeah. So I guess the thing I kind of wanted to start with, and I have it right here, so I'll just show it, is Sabriel by Garth Nix. Was probably the first dark fantasy book that I read. It's a YA novel series. And I think these were rebranded as adult covers. There's another set for the YA market. But this is a fantastic trilogy about necromancers, and it's very dark and gritty and just amazing. So I had to mention this because it was kind of like my first foray into the genre.
Great, thank you. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, so I've actually got two. My go-to is Neil Gaiman, who doesn't fit into the traditional like high fantasy, like swords and dragons realm of writing, but he's written everything from kids' books to adult, a very wide spectrum, and a lot of it fits into the dark fantasy category in different ways. So he's an excellent starting point for anyone who's looking to try out the genre, because there's a little bit of something for everyone there, I think. And then a more recent favorite, Emily Duncan is writing a dark fantasy trilogy. The first one is called Wicked Saints. It's based on kind of Russian and Eastern mythology, so it's a little different flavor of fantasy, with some very dark themes as well, but incredibly well written and interesting. So those are both excellent.
Say the title again.
The first one is called Wicked Saints.
Wicked Saints. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and that brings us to the close of another genre spotlight. Thank you, Jess, for joining us and for sharing that story.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and as always, we want to thank LA Arts for inviting us to be part of this, and thank you to everyone who tuned in for this event. And we will be back next month with another genre spotlight. So until then, everyone have a good time.
Bye.